千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together.
And now, 道德经, chapter 29. Here's how the chapter goes. Those who wish to take the world and control it, I see that they cannot succeed. The world is a sacred instrument. One cannot control it. The one who controls it will fail. The one who grasps it will lose. Because all things either lead or follow, either blow hot or cold, either have strength or weakness, either have ownership or take by force. Therefore, the sage eliminates extremes, eliminates excess, eliminates arrogance. Okay, so on the face of it, the one commentary that I want to offer to everyone is that without guidance, it can be difficult to see how one section leads to another and what kind of sense it makes. For example, Lao Tzu talks about how all things either lead or follow, blow hot or cold, etc. Well, how does that lead to the behavior of the sages in eliminating extremes, excess, and arrogance? They don't seem to go together, but they actually do. And it becomes very clear once you have the proper guidance in going through the meaning of this chapter. So hang in there, and I definitely want to guarantee that all will become clear in due time. Before we actually get into the meaning and the connection, we have to analyze this chapter to identify where the sections are. Now, from previous discussions, you know, or you may recall that for some, it is actually easier to begin from the last line and work your way back to the first line. So I find that's the case here. And let me illustrate what I mean. Just looking at the Chinese characters initially, you may feel a little bit lost. You know, what are the patterns? Where are the repeating characters? If you do see repeating characters, please feel free to point them out by typing in a comment or question in the question section. For now, I want to offer that the easiest way to see repeating patterns is to look at the last three lines. Can everyone see that the last three lines have one character in common? Not a trick question, not particularly difficult. The character that I have highlighted, the first character in each line, is the same. Comparing the original Chinese character with the translation, I think you can easily figure out the meaning of the highlighted character in red. Simply by looking at the repeating word in 13, 14, and 15. So I think you can figure out for yourself. It's eliminate. It means to eliminate or to get rid of something. But let's stick with the section analysis for now. So what is this saying? Well, therefore the sage will do the three things: eliminate extremes, eliminates excess, eliminates arrogance. So I think it makes logical sense that we would group these four lines together. This is one section expressing one idea about what the sages will do in terms of elimination. in terms of discarding from life. No extremes, no excess, no arrogance. Okay, so we've identified the last section. What about the other ones? Well, working our way back, I think it's also easy to see in the next 4 lines up. And what I mean is from line 8 down to line 11, lines 8, 9, 10, 11 have the same characters being repeated. Can everyone see it? Again, not a trick question. Should be pretty easy to see. And now the characters are highlighted. So that particular character in Mandarin is either or. And you can see that repeated in the translation. So this is the section that talks about the characteristics of all things. They either lead or follow, blow, how to code, etc. So I think it makes sense to group all of those together in one section. And there you have the middle section that talks about all things. And then the last section, as you can see, talks about the sage. This section is talking about the myriad things in the world, how they are so different. And that forms the middle section. So what about the first section? Can we work our way back and see more repeating characters? Okay, well, some repeating characters. In lines 5 and 6, you ought to be able to see that the second and fourth or last character is repeated from 5 to 6. Everyone see that? Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. So does that mean that we will have a division, a dividing line between 4 and 5? Well, let's take a look at the meaning from 1 down to 6. Let's temporarily forget about the sections below and just focus on the 6 lines. It's talking about taking the world, controlling it, and how this cannot succeed. And why can this not succeed? Because the world is a sacred instrument. And that is why the one who controls it will fail. The one who attempts to grasp it will lose. Okay, so that's actually one thought. That's actually one complete thought. It's expressed as 3 couplets, 3 collections of 2 lines. So 1 and 2 go together, 3 and 4 go together, and 5 and 6 obviously go together. But the whole thing, so those are really like subsections. The whole thing together can be regarded as one thought about the world being a sacred instrument. So there you have it. We have our first section, middle section, and concluding section. Okay, so I got just a little bit of an echo. Let me see if I can correct it. All right, let's continue. I want to point out one more set of repeating characters for your attention. If you take a look at 1 and 3, harder to see because they're not in the same position, but they're definitely the same characters. So 天下, we're about to get into this. There's quite a bit to discuss when it comes to 天下. this has been translated as the world. So it appears in the middle of the line in line 1 here, and appears in the beginning of line 3 in the English translation. So we need to talk about this, and we can start our line-by-line analysis with this concept, 天下. Okay, so what we'll do is that I'm going to introduce the term and get everyone up to speed on the pronunciation, the literal translation, and then we'll do some examples. Okay, so first, the pinyin. If you are formerly studying Mandarin, you will see the pinyin as like this, 天下. So the sound is like 天下, 天下. So just keep in mind that when X shows up in the pinyin system, it's always SH, SHI. So literally, 2 characters. The first character means heaven or sky. The second character means down, below, lower. So heaven below. But actually it means below heaven. Specifically, it means everything below heaven or the world. So this is a very common expression. It's been utilized from ancient times until today. If you were to study Mandarin today, if you were to speak with native Mandarin speakers, you will find this term popping up all the time. And it's in reference to the world. So let me bring that out as a bullet here. Here we go. Common expression in ancient Chinese and also in modern Mandarin. So let me do one example of it before diving in to this term in detail. So here's what I want to share with everyone. Back in 1971, Bruce Lee had an interview on the Pierre Berton show, and this was specifically December 9, 1971. So the host, Pierre Berton, asked Bruce Lee one particular question. He said, "Do you consider yourself to be Chinese or American?" So the way that Bruce answered the question was that he said, "You know what I want to think of myself? As a human being. Because under the sky, under the heavens, there is but one family." As you can see, this is a screen capture from that interview with the text added in. Now, the family, the one family he's talking about, of course, is the human family. We may look different, just as the siblings in a family can look different from one another, and yet we belong to the same family. Bruce Lee adds that it just so happens that people are different. But that doesn't invalidate the fact that under the sky, under the heavens, there is but one family. When we are fighting with one another, we are fighting within the family. And we have to realize that maybe a little sooner so that we can go back to being that one family. So Bruce Lee, of course, grew up in the Chinese culture, And therefore, the way he answered that question is interesting because he habitually thinks of this term, 天下. So that's why he says, under the sky, under the heavens. So fortunately, there's roughly equivalent expressions in English, so it makes sense to the audience. We sometimes will say, as the saying goes, there's nothing new under the sun. Well, under the sun is yet another similar expression, another similar formulation of it. So as Bruce Lee was answering that question, he had in mind 天下, these two terms. As I said, it's a term that was very common in ancient times. It was commonly used throughout Chinese history and is still commonly used today. Okay, looking at this slide, looking at the two Chinese characters right now, 天下, and seeing the under the sky, under the heavens, I want to suggest that the perceptive students may have a question, a valid question. That is, okay, well, we see the two characters and we see how they should be translated. So in the official translation for this particular chapter, 29, why wouldn't you just translate literally, 天下, and make under the sky, or under the heavens, the translation? Okay, good question. The reason why it's translated as the world is because the usage in the original Chinese is as a noun rather than as a preposition. So when you are trying to use it as a noun, it has to be translated as the world. Another reason is that there are plenty of expressions in Mandarin that should not be translated literally. That should be translated to the nearest equivalent in English. Let me show everyone some examples. So, 天下, why not translate literally as under the sky or under the heaven? Let me demonstrate examples of how not to translate and the correct translation. For instance, take a look at this. 男人. These two very common Mandarin characters, the two characters literally translate to male and person. Now, when 男人 comes up, do you imagine that people will translate male person? They actually don't. They go to the intended meaning, which is man. Makes sense, right? A man is a male person. Now, just by looking at this example, you can probably extrapolate the other one, the similar one, the complementary one. How do you say woman? Well, in Mandarin, it's 女人. Literal translation would be female person, and that would be the wrong way to translate it. You would simply translate it as woman. That's it. Now, there are other examples that are even more obvious. So take a look at this. 电话. 电, the first character means electric, electricity, or electronic. Second character means talk. Electronic talk. What is that? Well, you guys are very intelligent. I think you can easily guess what it's supposed to be. You would never ever translate it as electronic talk. Instead, you would translate it as telephone. So we can extrapolate from there to understand other aspects, similar aspects of Mandarin. So look at this one. 电视. Electronic vision. Whatever could that be? Does anyone have an idea? Not a trick question. Supposed to be easy. And of course, it really means television. You would never ever translate 电视 as electronic vision. You would always translate as television. So by the way, when it comes to a term like television, this is where you can see sometimes people will say that, well, every Chinese character has multiple meaning, and then, throughout history, it's taken on different meaning, and therefore that's the reason why translations of the Tao Te Ching vary so greatly. Okay, not true. Mandarin is like any other language on the face of this planet. Some terms have multiple meaning, some terms have just one. So, 电视, television, what's synonymous with that? Well, nothing really. You would simply translate as television. In English, we might get creative and say the boob tube, and that's actually an outdated term, realizing that nowadays most people just know television as the flat panel. It's the people who date themselves, like me, that still remember the tube. Okay, let's continue on. I think you are getting the hang of this, so I'll just do one more, and this is an interesting one, also very easy to guess. 电脑, electronic brain. That's a very evocative term. What is it? Obviously, I think everyone can guess. You would simply translate computer. You would never say electronic brain. Even though the two characters, that's what they are. 电 means electricity, electric, electronic. 脑 means brain. Okay, so enough about the electronics. I want to bring a term back in that's Tao related and showcase why you should not translate literally, but translate, the closest equivalent meaning in English. 自然, this comes up a lot in discussions about the Tao, in the Tao Te Ching. So composed of two characters, 自 means self, 然 means yes or so. So there's a teacher from the 1960s, who did not know Mandarin, studies it academically, and came up with a whole talk about 自然 means of itself so, and then talked a lot about that, delved into it rather deeply. Now, people ate it up. They really loved it because, they didn't know Mandarin either. As a native Mandarin speaker, I just had to laugh at that because the term means nothing more than natural. 自然 should never be translated as of itself so, as the teacher from the 60s suggested, but should always be translated as natural. And this one is, I left this one for last because this one is tricky. It's not referring to oneself in any particular way. It's not as easy to guess as all the electronic terms. It's not as easy to guess as the male and female. So that's the reason why it appears last. So there are still some challenges in translation. At the end of the day, you just really got to know the language. You got to be able to speak it. You got to be able to read it. You got to be able to draw a line between one language and the other. Got to be able to map the meaning. So I think, that was a fun, interesting look into linguistic differences and translation. But let's continue on into the chapter itself. I want to start with line 1. Now that we've talked about the world, if you take a look at the translation here, those who wish to take the world and control it, because it is used as a noun, 天下, not as a preposition, it would be odd for you to say it like those who wish to take everything under heaven and control it. That would be rather verbose. So it's better just to be concise and try to replicate the brevity of the original Chinese. Okay, so let's talk about this line. Let's talk about the meaning of it. Those who wish to take the world and control it, what is Lao Tzu talking about? He's talking about a certain kind of people. Specifically, he's talking about the kind of people who have that tendency to dominate. They're domineering and controlling. As with most lines in the Tao Te Ching, this line can apply in multiple levels in various ways. So let's talk about the different levels for a moment. At the kingdom state level, so that would be the level that the ancient sages would observe different kingdoms, the relationship between them, the alliance, the diplomacy, etc. So at that level, at the level of the ruler, this will be tyrants bent on conquest. This will be dictators bent on oppression, oppressing the people. So that is the expression wishing to take the world and control it. So what about other levels? Well, let's not forget the personal level, because in the Tao, you are the ruler of your own life. At the personal level, this can manifest as horrible bosses or individuals who are aggressive and always trying to meddle in other people's business. So, as my friend Barry would say, these would be the micromanagers, and he will be absolutely correct. So, the Tao manifests the same way at different levels of reality. Let's continue on. There's another context where we can talk about those who wish to take the world and control it. And this is something that's emerging in modern times, something that was not so apparent in ancient times. What am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about how in modern times, we can apply this to corporations exploiting and damaging the environment for the sake of profits. Do those exist? Well, of course they exist. They're out there. And we have a pretty good idea about a lot of them as to who they are, their identity. So this came to mind recently. I was speaking to a friend who lives in Oklahoma. So Oklahoma is like in the middle of the country. So one thing that my friend said caught my attention. He talked about earthquakes in Oklahoma. This became something that drew my attention, because people who live in California know that whenever they talk to people from other states, one of the most common talking points is usually, it goes like, the Californian will talk about how much better the weather is in California. And then the friend from a different state will say, yeah, but you guys have the earthquakes. If you live in California, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That conversation replays itself many, many times whenever you talk to your friend who's in a different state. So when he talked about earthquakes, initially I assumed he was talking about California earthquakes, but he clarified, and I realized that he's talking about earthquakes where he lives in Oklahoma. And I said, you guys don't get earthquakes. You're not like us. You don't live over here on the Pacific Rim where you have the San Andreas Faults. You have the constant worry about earthquakes. You have the threat of the big one, the quote unquote, the big one that's looming. We don't know when it's going to happen. We just know that it's going to happen within decades. So he said, no, I'm talking about right here in Oklahoma. Yeah, he said something that I found was so interesting. He said, it didn't used to be, but nowadays, earthquakes are a fact of life in Oklahoma, in some parts of Oklahoma, especially where he lives. And I said, what? What are you talking about? It turns out that it is indeed true what he's saying. Indeed, the state of Oklahoma now has earthquake risk comparable to California, but it's actually man-made. It's actually triggered by fracking operations, specifically the injection of fracking wastewater deep into the ground. So this blew my mind. I had no idea this was happening. I knew that I had to look into it right away just to see for myself. I always used to assume that no such thing as man-made earthquakes. It may be a plot point in a James Bond 007 James Bond movie where the villain has this earthquake device to cause widespread destruction. But in real life, come on. Well, it's actually true. And my research led me to this. So this is a map of the United States. As you can see, to the left, we have the West Coast. So those are the charts, the colors are showing chains of damage from an earthquake in 2016. So the dark red means the greatest chance. It means that some people will encounter severe damage. For other people, of course, it'll just be rattling and shaking. So on the West Coast, up and down the West Coast, you see Seattle has orange in there, and California has a lot of orange, and has dark red in the San Francisco Bay Area, or close to the San Francisco Bay Area. That's California. It's expected. Rest of the country, well, if you look at Denver, it's actually white, meaning there's no chance. But if you look beyond the Rocky Mountains, to the right, you see Oklahoma City. As I said, this is pretty much the middle of the country, a place that's not known for earthquake activities before. But now it's actually similar, even greater, a larger patch of dark red for 2016 than California. And the California coloring is based on the results from 2014. So highly accurate. And the graph on the right shows exactly what my friend was talking about, that it's a fact of life. So that kind of shocks me. And it brings to mind this very line that we're talking about in the Tao Te Ching, that we have definitely entities, corporations, companies in the energy sector that are exploiting the environment to feed our energy appetites. We as a civilization, we need oil for so many things, and not just gasoline for our vehicles, not just jet fuel for the airplanes. We also need oil for plastics. So even the credit cards that we use, and our dependency on oil has motivated many companies to exploit the environment as much as possible. Now, the solution is far from simple. We can't just stop it. We have to transition away from it. But that's a whole nother TED Talk. So let's just stick to the Tao for now. I was only pointing that out as yet another example, manifesting from the words of Lao Tzu. Even though back in the days of Lao Tzu, there was no utilization of gasoline as a fuel, just by calling out a pattern of reality, he's able to, in a way, predict what we will see in today's world. So let's talk about line 2. All of these things, the tyrants, the dictators, the bad boss, the horrible boss, the micromanager, the corporations exploiting the environment, line 2 says they cannot succeed because that which goes against the Tao cannot last, and therefore attempts to dominate and control will eventually fail. So for a while, it may seem like these people are doing all right. But history proves again and again that they don't last. So one example that comes to mind that we have seen in history, well, we have seen many tyrants and dictators come and go. I'll just name a couple from recent history. So first example I was curious about was Saddam Hussein. So he was president of Iraq from 1979 to 2003, which is a span of 24 years. So a little bit less than a quarter of a century. Seems like a long time by human reckoning. In the eyes of the Tao, it's less than an eye blink. So when he died, it was by execution. He died by hanging, so did not come to a great end. So another tyrant, perhaps the most famous one of all throughout history, would be Hitler. So he was in office as Führer of Germany for an even less time, even less reign than Saddam Hussein. He was Führer from 1934 to 1945. That's a span of 11 years. So before he was caught by Allied forces, he committed suicide in his bunker. So did not come to a good end. So the horrors of World War II, the Holocaust, etc., all of that sourcing back to a tyrant who held on to power for just a little bit over a decade. And we can see the same kind of thing in our daily lives as well. We don't need to, look to history for these examples. Just by looking around, just by looking at the world around us, we talked about horrible bosses, we talked about micromanagers, and this brings to mind an interesting conversation that I had with a friend who works in human resources. His insights that I found so interesting, he said, people don't leave bad jobs. And I said, I thought they did. He said, no, they leave bad bosses. Over and over again, that's how the patterns in HR, in human resources, turns out to be. And it's true. People stick around with a bad boss, with a micromanager, only when they have to. And when they get the chance to go somewhere else, even if it's with a pay cut, they make the move. So the bottom line is that in real life, we've also seen this, that everybody wants to get away from controlling and meddlesome people. The very last point, last but not the least, the point that I want to make is that all of us, we all want to make sure we're not the one who wants to be controlling and domineering. So there are some thoughts on that that I'd like to share with you in just a little bit. For now, though, let me talk about the failure aspects of it, that these people don't last, they fail. So in the original, you see characters about cannot succeed, fail, and lose. So this is looking ahead a little bit, sort of expanding the scope of the line-by-line analysis to point ahead. So the wish to control and manipulate comes from two factors, I would say. One, excessive greed and desire to dominate. I have underlined the word excessive because this calls to the very end of this chapter, the very last section, where it talks about the sages eliminating excess. So excessive greed or desire to dominate leads to the wish to control and manipulate. The other factor is arrogance that is rooted in ignorance. Again, the word arrogance is underlined because this is looking ahead to the last section of 29, where it talks about sages will eliminate arrogance. And if you think about the horrible bosses, the micromanagers, is there arrogance? Oh, definitely. In the dictators and tyrants, is there arrogance? Of course. Is there excessive greed? Yes, absolutely. And it's all rooted in ignorance. So the natural result of that, and here I'm coming back to what you see as lines 5 and 6, the result is the increasing escalation of ever more extreme measures. What I mean by that is people don't just try to, for instance, meddle with your life. When they fail to get the result they want, they resort to ever more extreme measures to try to get what they want. Extreme underscored yet another term that is calling to the end of this particular chapter, where the sages eliminate extremes. And lastly, the ultimate result of all this is failure and loss, because the one who controls will fail. The one who just can't stay away from grasping, that person will lose. So we're looking ahead a little bit. I want to come back to where we were at. We just got done talking about line 2. I want to move on to line 3 and talk about the world as a sacred instrument. But this is just to give everyone a feeling for how the end of a chapter ties back to the beginning. This time I'm doing it a little bit differently. I'm looking toward the end, even though we're still in the first section. Okay, so let's come back to line 3, where we talk about 神器. So again, in pinyin, the spelling can be a little bit misleading. Just remember that qi, qi, sounds like chi, chi. And that's how it is in the pinyin system. It's one of the oddities that everyone has to learn when studying Mandarin formally. Okay, so let's talk about the literal meaning. Shen literally means divine or sacred, deities. And then qi means instrument, vessel, tools. So together, they form this expression that I would like to focus on. So the world is sacred. The world is a sacred instrument. The world is sacred. And this is true whether it is in context of nations, in ancient times, kingdoms, states, or if it's in context of the environment. The environments, the world, the earth, the globe, it's sacred. And it is also true in context of your life. I'll get to that in just a moment. So the idea is that we must approach the world with the appropriate respect. So now I want to explore the divinity of the world, the sacredness of the world. I want to ask everyone this question. I'm getting a lot of participation today, which is fantastic. Question to you. What makes this so? Why is it sacred? Not intended to be a trick question at all. I think it should be obvious to all of us why the world is sacred. But I would like to hear from you on your thoughts, because mastermind, because we're all much greater when we come together and contemplate, discuss these issues in a spirit of harmony. So, pausing for a moment before I move on to one context of the world being sacred. This particular context, I think everyone would agree that the earth is beautiful beyond description. Now, of course, the ancient sages had no idea how the earth looked from space. They perhaps had an inkling that the world is beautiful just by looking around. They could, for example, climb a high mountain and then look down to see how things look from very high up, usually the vantage point of flying creatures, the birds. So they could intuitively sense and extrapolate from what they saw that the world was precious. After all, the world is what gives humanity the gift of life. It is, after all, the only world we have. If we mess this up, guys, it's game over for mankind. It's the end of mankind. So I think everyone has the same idea. The world is all we know. It is all we have. We have guesses about heaven, void, etc. We cannot observe them directly, but the world, we can. So Tim, you're absolutely correct. The urge to control oftentimes comes from fear. So I absolutely agree with my friend Carol. And what is required to let go of this fear is courage. And Barry is also correct, sacred, special, unlike any other. This is the only world we possess. We don't have a backup. We don't have a plan B. This is not only our plan A, it's the only plan. So oftentimes we talk about marriage being sacred because it's a relationship unlike others. So it's the same about the sacredness of the world. We have this world unlike any other. We have this life unlike any other. We don't have a backup life. Cat may have 9 lives, we sure don't. This lifetime, this is it. So there are people, of course, who are forward-looking, looking to the future of mankind, and they may point out that, for instance, in the distant future, humanity may have enough ability, resources, technology to go to different worlds, to go to other worlds. Television shows and movies, Star Trek, Star Wars are based on that premise. Closer at hand, in the near term, in comparison to science fiction, What about migration to other planets in the solar system? So wouldn't that be a possibility too? And then we wouldn't just have, the Earth as the only plan that we have instead of plan A, plan B. So here's something that I think is worth keeping in mind. We know that it's going to cost a great deal of time and effort, resources to go to another planet. We already know that. We can plan it out. We know what's required. We know technology that is almost ready for doing something like that. We know what it would take to sustain a remote outpost of humanity in the solar system. So scientist Neil deGrasse Tyson pointed out that this cost of going to another planet, whatever other planets we have in mind, let's just say Mars, that cost would be far more than simply fixing the planet that we are already at. So going to another planet, while it is necessary, is something that has to be done, is something that we really need to do as a species, we gotta keep in mind that the cost of doing that is far more than the cost that it would take to fix our problems right here and now. So I hope that helps in viewing the world as sacred. It's not just the only world that we know at the present time. Even when we have multiple worlds, this is still the special one. This is still the birthplace of humanity. It is still sacred and divine. So I want to bring that back to more of a human level, your level, my level. So what is the sacred instrument for you and me? The world in which we inhabit is precious and divine and sacred. Earth gives humanity the gift of life, and therefore it is sacred. I want to suggest that your existence, your life, your being here and now, that too is a gift. Think of it as a gift of life from the Tao to you. Therefore, it is sacred. It is the means by which you possess sentience and consciousness and awareness. So, as my friend Nick would say, you can feel moments of silence. In moments of silence, you can feel that life is precious. And you can really feel how brief it is when you contemplate what we have left. And that makes it all the more precious, of course. So here's another aspect that I want to bring into it. The existence that you have, the being in this world, the life that you have, your world as defined by your social circle, your day-to-day life, that is sacred. So think of it this way as well. It's not just a sacred instrument, but the life you have lived and the life you have yet to live, so I'm talking about the past and future, with the present in between, that totality, that is your sacred journey. And that journey is a personal journey of exploration and discovery. So, sacred world, sacred journey. That's going to be my theme for today. And let me put an emphasis on it right now. I feel that this is important. It certainly is important to me.
I want to specifically address your sacred journey. I would like everyone to spend a moment to think about this sacred journey that you've been on, that you are currently on, and that you will continue on. So that's divided into past, present, and future. Past, as in, how was the journey that got you here? How was it? How did it go? Present, where are you now in the big picture? In your overall journey, where are you now? And of course, you would expect that I would also ask you to think about what is ahead. Future, what is the journey ahead of you? So we're talking about pretty weighty topics here. Each one of these red bullet points has sub-bullet points that I would like to ask you to contemplate. Question about the past, or about the journey that got you here. What were your aspirations when you were young? I remember when I was much younger, I aspired to become a scientist. And the reason that I wanted to become a scientist was because I thought those lab coats looked really cool. And I still do. They're cool. I also loved, as a young child, I loved the idea of a security access badge that gets you into different parts of the building. Access, that I thought was so cool. And I also thought was extremely cool that scientists got to work with computers with all these blinking lights and spinning tapes. Lo and behold, we have a lot of computers today. They don't have blinking lights and spinning tapes. So what about you? What were your aspirations when you were young? Along the way, what were the challenges that you encountered? I've certainly had my share. I'm pretty sure you did too. So out of all that, looking back, what have you accomplished so far? Even if it's not a whole lot, they are your accomplishments, and in that regard, they are absolutely unique. Unique to you, unique to the entire world. So having contemplated that, let's turn our attention to present moment awareness, the here and now, the what's in front of us. So when asking questions about the present, in the overall context of your journey, your sacred journey, I'd like to ask you to contemplate from the vantage point of the present moment. What have you gained and lost? So it's the summation of what you experienced in the past, not just what you have accomplished, but also perhaps a loss that you have suffered at some point. And another question, what would you do differently if you could start over? And this is not to suggest that everyone become fixated or attached to the past, but merely that we can use the past as a guideline to plan a better future. Speaking of the future, let's talk about that too, the journey ahead of you. Here, the teaching from the Tao is the admonition that you must choose to be the master of your own destiny. Don't look to others to tell you what to do, where to go. You want to cultivate within yourself the ability to master your own destiny. You want to create a new beginning for yourself from this point on, extending to the future.
So looking to the future, I would say that this new beginning that you can create for yourself, it's quite real. And your cultivation of the Tao is the door that opens up to it. In the first chapter of the Tao Te Ching, the Tao is said to be the door that leads you to wonders. And that is what this is talking about. So if you like, please feel free to share some thoughts with me as far as your overall life journey. If you like to use me as a sounding board, I would be honored to take a look, to listen, and if you like, to suggest. Let's move on. Line 4, one cannot control it. So when we're talking about the world, one thing that is true is that there are many external factors in life that one cannot control. We all know that from personal experience. Therefore, we know that you cannot control the external factors of any journey, metaphorical or physical. When I say physical journey, I'm talking about like a road trip. Metaphorical journey, I'm talking about like the journey of life. So whether it's one or the other, there are plenty of external factors that we cannot control. So let's use some examples to make that less abstract. If we're talking about a physical journey, like a road trip, factors we cannot control may include the weather, the traffic, road closures, construction, accidents, etc. Many factors beyond our control. Now, question to everyone. What do you have control over? So the answer is, well, you know that for a road trip, you do control your vehicle. Let's just say you're driving. You can have control over navigation. That is to say which path to take to get to your destination. And most importantly, you can control your reaction to whatever happens, to the external factors, to what's going on out there. You can choose to be a rageaholic and indulge in road rage or not. You can always control your attitude, your thoughts. So let's go a little bit deeper into it, because each of these have equivalents in the journey of life. So I want to talk about those equivalents. The physical maps to the metaphorical, so the road trip can map to the journey of life itself. So for the road trip, that is your life. Well, the vehicle is your physical body. You need to keep it in good operational condition. So to the body, that means health, longevity, health, longevity, and energy level. These are all connected with one another. Greater health leads to extended longevity, leads to greater energy level, and so on. So keeping the vehicle, the car, in good repair is like keeping the body in good health. So navigation for the trip is equivalent to your decision-making ability, which can be substantially improved if you have a good GPS. In the journey of life, the Tao plays the role of that GPS guidance. It provides you with guidance for choosing the best path. And that's what the Tao is. The Tao, the Chinese character, means the path. And I want to make it clear, a lot of times questions come up about, as far as, we talk about love and friendship and so on, but there's plenty of negative things in life, but they're all part of the Tao, the universal Tao as well, because universal Tao includes everything. That's true. But there's a context of the character Tao that means the path or the way. And the meaning, the deeper meaning of that is the same in Mandarin as it is in English. Let me explain. If you were asking someone how to get to a particular place, that person may say, yeah, I know the way. I know the way to get there. I know the path, or I can show you the path. I can point you to the way to get there. When they say the path or the way, they're actually implying, I know the best way to get there. I know the best path to get to that point from here. So the way, the path, is talking about the best path, the best way. So that's going to preclude, it's going to exclude a lot of paths that can also get you there, but are not the best. So it's the same in Tao. A path of violence and brutality will get you to a certain point in life called death. It's a different way to get there. It's not the best way. It's therefore not the path or the way. Violence is not the way. So lastly, your reaction to external conditions, that is your management of internal mental states. That is, as we have talked about, attitudes, thoughts. Here I'm stating emotions, clarity, and meaning. What I mean by that is your reaction to what is happening, you oftentimes assign meaning to it. This is happening because of XYZ. Well, you actually have total control over that. You can assign meaning to what's going on in the best possible way for yourself. You can manage your emotional states to your advantage rather than to your detriment. So let me, for now, focus everyone's attention on the physical body and talk about health. And I believe that's actually that's all we're gonna have time for today. Here, I want to talk about signs on the road. I want to talk about the potential pitfall in a road trip where you can come across wrong or misleading signs. When you follow such signs, you end up being lost. Maybe the sign was unclear, or maybe it was pointing in the wrong direction, perhaps it was outdated. When we go on a road trip, we usually assume the signs must be up to date and accurate, but that's not always the case. Probably in the past, you've had experience when following certain signs, you got lost. That's not always the case. So I want to map that to real life, to your life journey. The problem that we have in Tao cultivation for the journey of life is that there are also misleading signs that manifest as wrong or misleading information. So a little bit earlier, I talked about translations where the translator doesn't really understand the original, well, that can definitely lead to misleading information. In health, we also come across a lot of information, not all of which are accurate signs. We often assume experts know what they're talking about, but sometimes we have to scrutinize that assumption. So I want to briefly mention a recent example. Not going to go heavily into it because it is a sensitive topic. The main point that I want to make is to be careful about the information you consume. In this, I absolutely agree with Nick that there's so much industry-funded science in nutrition these days. Recent example, there's a lot of news stories about how a vegan diet can stunt brain development due to choline deficiency. My goodness, this is the new B12. It used to be that a lot of talk was given to attention on B12 deficiency and how vegan diets was deficient of that. Well, listen, if you talk to a real doctor with many patients, like a general practitioner, that doctor will tell you that many of his or her patients who are B12 deficient are not vegetarians or vegans. That's because B12 comes from dirt, essentially. So food that is too clean, which nowadays can include meat as well as vegetables, can be B12 deficient. Used to be that you could get enough B12 by consuming meat. You still can today by consuming, for instance, hamburger, because burgers are made from ground beef, which contains, frankly, a lot of dirt, also a lot of feces, more than you really want to consume. But it's well cooked, so people don't really notice or realize. So this is misleading. Most people don't really have the science background to tell that this is not accurate. Choline, which is essential for brain development, is present in abundance in vegetables as well. So it can be very easily maintained by vegans and vegetarians. That's number one. Number two, objective studies of cognitive decline has definitely, over decades, has definitely shown that a plant-based diet is actually better for cognition, not worse. The people that have the cognitive decline due to a complex array of reasons tend to be non-vegans. So the study, industry funded, does not match reality. So I want to draw everyone's attention to that as a misleading sign without spending too much time on it, because I do realize that this is a sensitive topic. There are probably people who would rather I don't talk about this at all. So I'm going to stop here and move to the summary for today. So I want to give everyone some reminders from 29, chapter 29. Reminders from chapter 29. So my theme, as you recall me saying, is sacred world, sacred journey. Your sacred world, your sacred journey. So to remind you, to summarize what we talked about today, those who attempt to dominate and control cannot succeed because they move against the Tao. What they do is not the Tao. What they do is not the best path or the best way. Therefore, in our own journey through the sacred world, we must take care to do some things. Number one, Focus on controlling ourselves instead of others. You've got full control of yourself. Don't try to control other people. Number 2, let go of attachments. Attachments manifesting in the journey as excess baggage. Let them go so we can decrease the burden and increase enjoyment of the journey itself. It's the journey that we're all on right now, and we can all travel more lightly. Lastly, I want to ask everyone, let the Tao be your guide, or to say it another way, use the guide as illumination to light the journey ahead, to show the best path.
Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.